I arrived at the Pinnacle Ballroom at 6:47 on October 9th. My husband walked to the podium at 7:31. He thanked the woman in the front row at 7:33. I made no sound. I took no action. I simply watched the numbers add up. If you're hearing this story, I hope you'll follow along to find out how it ends. I promise you, the math works out perfectly. Real estate is a numbers game. Everyone thinks it's about charm or staging or knowing the right people, but those are just window dressing. The real work happens in comparables, in mortgage calculations, in understanding exactly what a property is worth and what someone can actually afford to pay. I had been a licensed agent for 11 years. I had closed over 400 transactions. I understood value, I understood leverage, and I had learned over the course of my marriage to Derek Holloway that those principles applied to more than houses. We met in Little Rock in the spring of 2013. I was 26, working under a broker named Suzanne Chen at a mid-size firm called Century Realty. Derek had just passed his licensing exam and joined the same office. He was handsome in an easy, forgettable way, with dark blonde hair and a smile that photographs well. He sold the story of himself better than he sold houses. Within 6 months, we were dating. Within a year, engaged. By 2015, married. He was adequate at the job, not brilliant, not terrible. He closed maybe 15 deals a year, which kept him afloat but never made him notable. I closed 30 to 40 annually, often representing both sides of the transaction. I didn't mind that I out-earned him. I didn't need him to be the top producer. I just needed him to be honest. Suzanne Chen retired in 2018. The firm needed new leadership. I had seniority, a flawless track record, and client relationships that spanned a decade. Derek had charm and a better golf handicap. The board of directors voted 3-2 to make him managing broker. I was offered associate broker, a title with no authority and a 2% raise. I accepted it without protest. I had been trained to read contracts carefully, and I read that outcome for what it was, a signal. I began paying closer attention. In 2019, I noticed Derek's name appearing as the listing agent on properties I had sourced. Clients I had nurtured for months would suddenly be reassigned for scheduling reasons. I mentioned it once. He said I was being paranoid. I didn't mention it again. Instead, I started keeping my own files. I made copies of intake forms, saved email threads, and recorded my initial consultations with client permission. I didn't yet know what I would need. I simply knew I would need something. In 2021, a woman named Vanessa Treadwell joined Century Realty. She was 31, newly licensed, blonde in a calculated way that required maintenance. She wore sleeveless blouses even in winter, and laughed too loudly at Derek's jokes during office meetings. I cataloged this the way I cataloged foundation cracks during a walkthrough. Noted, not yet actionable. By mid-2022, Derek's close rate had improved. I didn't congratulate him. I ran the numbers. 8 of his last 12 sales had originated from my referral network. 2 others were repeat clients who had bought their first homes through me. I said nothing. I copied the transaction records and filed them in a folder I kept in my car. In January 2023, I opened a savings account Derek didn't know about. I routed 10% of every commission check into it. Not enough to be missed. Just enough to matter. I had learned that in real estate, liquidity is freedom. By summer of 2023, Vanessa's name was appearing on Derek's transaction files as a buyer's agent on dual representation deals that should have gone to other associates. I didn't confront him. Confrontation is for people who want catharsis. I wanted documentation. I began photographing the office schedule board, the one that showed agent assignments. I backed up my digital calendar. I kept a log of which clients I had introduced to Derek and when. In March of 2024, I noticed a charge on our joint credit card for a locksmith service I hadn't authorized. The address was listed as our home. I was home the day the locksmith came. No one rang the bell. I didn't ask Derek about it. I ordered a credit report instead. That's when I found the second mortgage, a home equity line of credit for $68,000, opened 4 months earlier, with both our names on the application. My signature had been forged. I recognized the differences. The capital L in my last name leaned wrong. I made a photocopy and placed it in the folder in my car. I also quietly refinanced the house into my name alone the following week, using a lender in another city. Derek never checked the title. He assumed what most people assume, that things would stay the way they had always been. In August, Derek told me the firm was nominating him for the Century Realty Regional Awards, a recognition given to one broker per district each year. The criteria included sales volume, client satisfaction, leadership, and peer reputation. He was excited. He told me Vanessa had helped him prepare the application. I asked if I could read it before submission. He said it had already been sent. I obtained a copy from the awards committee 3 days later, using a public records request. The application listed transactions I had closed. It included testimonials from clients I had served. It referenced a community outreach program I had designed and launched. Derek's name was on every page. Mine appeared once, in the spouse acknowledgement section, spelled incorrectly. I did not react. I calculated. The awards banquet was scheduled for October 9th at the Pinnacle Ballroom, a mid-tier event venue on the west side of Little Rock. 200 people were expected: agents, brokers, lenders, title company reps, and local developers. It was the kind of evening where everyone smiled too much and drank too little because they were still at work. I had been to this event 9 times. I knew the rhythm of it. Cocktails at 6:30, dinner at 7:15, awards at 7:30, dancing and schmoozing until 9. I understood what the evening was worth to Derek. He wanted to be seen. He wanted applause. He wanted his name remembered. On October 7th, 2 days before the banquet, I met with an attorney named Lydia Foss. She worked in property and contract law. I had referred clients to her for years. I trusted her. I brought 3 folders. The first contained copies of client intake forms, emails, and contracts, showing that 18 of Derek's transactions over the past 3 years had originated from my network, my referrals, or my direct client relationships. The commission splits listed him as primary agent. He had earned roughly $214,000 from work one had sourced. The second folder contained the forged home equity application and a notarized affidavit from a handwriting analyst I had hired in September. The analyst confirmed the signature was not mine. The loan had been used, according to bank records I subpoenaed, to pay off Derek's personal credit card debt and to fund what was described as business development expenses. There were receipts for hotels, dinners, and a weekend trip to Branson. Vanessa Treadwell's name appeared on several of the itemized bills. The third folder contained corporate documents. Century Realty had been privately held since its founding in 1991. Suzanne Chen had owned 70%. When she retired, she sold her shares. The buyer was listed as SLC Holdings, a limited liability company registered in Delaware. The managing member of SLC Holdings was me. I had purchased Suzanne's stake in 2018 using an inheritance from my grandmother and a small business loan. The sale had been private, structured through a lawyer, and filed in a jurisdiction Derek never thought to check. I owned 70% of the company that employed him. He had never asked. He had simply assumed the board of directors was independent. It wasn't. I was the board. Lydia reviewed everything in silence. When she finished, she looked up and said, "What outcome do you want?" I said, "I want him to know what he gave away." She nodded. "I can draft this by tomorrow." The plan was simple. I would attend the banquet. I would sit at the table reserved for award recipients and their guests. I would smile. I would applaud. And then, at the moment Derek reached the peak of his evening, I would introduce a correction. I wore a navy dress, high-necked and long-sleeved, the kind that photographs well without drawing attention. I arrived early. The Pinnacle Ballroom was decorated in the Century Realty brand colors, charcoal and gold. Round tables for 8 filled the room. A small stage stood at the front, flanked by 2 projection screens. I recognized most of the faces in the crowd. I had sold homes to a third of them. Derek arrived at 7:04 with Vanessa on his arm. She wore red, a shade too bright for the venue, and her laugh carried across the room. He saw me at the table and hesitated for only a moment before smiling. He kissed my cheek. He smelled like cologne I hadn't bought him. Vanessa sat down beside him. I sat across from them. Neither of them spoke to me during dinner. The awards segment began at 7:28. There were 5 categories. Derek was nominated in Broker Leadership Excellence. The other nominees were capable people I had worked with for years. When Derek's name was announced as the winner, the applause was polite. Vanessa clapped the loudest. Derek walked to the podium. The host handed him a glass plaque. He adjusted the microphone. He smiled into the spotlight. He began his speech. He thanked the company. He thanked his team. He thanked his mentor, a man who had retired 4 years ago and was not in the room. And then he said, "But I really need to recognize the real woman behind my success." He paused. The room quieted. He gestured to the front row. "Vanessa Treadwell has been my right hand this year. She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. She pushed me to take risks, to lead with confidence, to build something bigger than myself. This award belongs to her just as much as it belongs to me." Vanessa stood. She pressed one hand to her chest, feigning surprise. The applause was scattered and confused. A few people glanced at me. I did not move. I did not change my expression. I simply waited. Derek continued. "Vanessa and I have been working on something special. We've been building a vision for the future of Century Realty. A vision that prioritizes innovation, collaboration, and bold leadership. I'm excited to share more about that in the coming weeks." He raised his glass. Vanessa raised hers. They looked at each other the way people do when they think no one else understands them. I stood. The movement was enough to draw attention. Derek looked at me, his smile faltered. I walked to the front of the room, my heels silent on the ballroom carpet. The host stepped aside. I took the microphone from the stand. I did not introduce myself. Everyone in the room knew who I was. I said, "I'd like to offer some context." I nodded to the audio-visual operator in the back. The projection screens flickered to life. On the left, a spreadsheet. On the right, a scanned document. The spreadsheet listed every transaction Derek had closed in the past 3 years. Each row included the client name, the close date, the commission earned, and the originating agent. My name appeared in the originating agent column 18 times. The total commission Derek had earned from those transactions was highlighted in yellow, $214,600. I let the room read it. Then I said, these are the numbers Derek used in his award application. The clients, the testimonials, the results he claimed as leadership. 18 of these transactions originated from my referral network. I sourced the clients. I built the relationships. Derek closed the deals and took credit for the work. A murmur moved through the room. Derek's face had gone pale. Vanessa sat very still. I gestured to the second screen. It showed the forged home equity loan application. This is a loan application submitted in November of last year, I said. It uses my name and my signature. The signature is forged. The loan, for $68,000, was used to pay off personal debt and fund trips that had nothing to do with business development. I let that settle. Then I said, Derek also told you tonight that he and Vanessa have a vision for the future of Century Realty. I'd like to clarify something about that future. I nodded again. The screens changed. Now they displayed the corporate filing documents for SLC Holdings and the share transfer agreement from 2018. I am the majority owner of Century Realty, I said. I have been since Suzanne Chen retired. I own 70% of this company. Derek has been employed by me for the past 6 years. So has Vanessa. The silence was total. I looked at Derek. You're fired. Effective immediately. Vanessa, you're fired as well. You'll both receive severance as outlined in your employment contracts, which I had reviewed this morning. You have until end of business Friday to clear your desks. Derek opened his mouth. No sound came out. I set the microphone back on the stand. I turned to the room and said, "Thank you all for coming. Please enjoy the rest of your evening." I walked out of the ballroom at 7:39. I did not wait for a reaction. I did not need one. I drove home in silence. The house was dark when I arrived. I unlocked the door, turned on one lamp in the living room, and sat on the couch. I did not cry. I did not pour a drink. I simply sat and breathed and let the evening finish itself elsewhere. Derek came home at 9:14. He slammed the door. He shouted my name. I stayed seated. He came into the living room. His tie was loosened. His face was red. What the hell was that? I looked at him. That was the truth. You humiliated me, he said, in front of everyone. You destroyed my career. You destroyed your career, I said. I just made sure people knew whose work you were claiming. He paced. You can't fire me. You can't just. This is insane. You're my wife. I'm your employer, I said. And you forged my signature on a loan document. That's fraud. I could have you arrested. He stopped. I was going to tell you about the loan. When? He didn't answer. I said, you were going to tell me after you'd spent it. After you'd used my credit to fund your affair. After you'd taken everything you thought I wouldn't notice. It's not an affair, he said. I almost laughed. What is it then? Vanessa understands me. She sees what I'm capable of. You've always treated me like I'm some kind of charity case. I treated you like a partner, I said. I gave you opportunities. I referred clients to you. I supported your career even when you didn't deserve it, and you repaid me by stealing my work and crediting someone else. You never needed the credit, he said. You're already successful. I was trying to build something for myself. Then you should have built it yourself. He stared at me. You really own the company? Yes. Since when? Since 2018. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at him for a long moment. Because I wanted to see what you would do if you thought no one was watching. He had no answer for that. I said, you have 3 days to move out. I've already filed for dissolution of marriage. You'll be served tomorrow. The house is in my name. The cars are in my name. The joint accounts have been closed. You'll receive what the law requires and nothing more. You planned this, he said. Yes. For how long? Long enough. He left the room. I heard him in the bedroom, opening drawers, slamming closet doors. He packed 2 suitcases and left at 10:46. He did not say goodbye. I sat in the quiet house and thought about all the properties I had walked through over the years, the ones with good bones, and the ones that were only cosmetic, the ones that could be saved and the ones that needed to be torn down. I had always known the difference. The next morning, I went to the Century Realty office at 8. Word had already spread. The receptionist looked at me with wide eyes but said nothing. I walked past the rows of desks to the managing broker's office, the one Derek had occupied for 6 years. His assistant, a woman named Gwen, who had worked for the firm since before I started, stood in the doorway. She looked relieved to see me. "Is it true?" she asked. "Yes." She nodded. "Good." I spent the morning in meetings. First with Lydia Foss, who walked me through the formal termination documentation and the divorce filing timeline, then with the remaining senior agents, 4 people I had worked alongside for nearly a decade. I told them the ownership structure, I told them what had happened, I told them the firm would continue operating as it always had, with one exception: I would be taking over as managing broker effective immediately. No one objected. By noon, Derek's desk was cleared. Vanessa's desk, in the corner near the break room, was also empty. Gwen had packed their belongings into boxes and left them in the back hallway. I didn't ask where they went. It didn't matter. I called an all-staff meeting for 2 o'clock. 37 agents and support staff gathered in the main conference room. I stood at the front and explained, briefly and without drama, what had occurred. I did not editorialize. I simply stated that Derek Holloway and Vanessa Treadwell were no longer with the firm, that I was the majority owner and would be assuming leadership, and that business would continue without interruption. One of the newer agents, a man named Kyle, raised his hand. "Are we all still employed?" "Yes," I said. "Your contracts are unchanged. Your commissions are unchanged. If you want to stay, you're welcome. If you want to leave, I'll provide references." No one left. I spent the next 2 weeks rebuilding. I reviewed every open transaction. I reassigned Derek's active clients to agents who had capacity and expertise. I updated the internal file systems. I met with lenders, title companies, and inspectors to reassure them that Century Realty was stable. I worked 16-hour days. I did not mind. Work has always been the one thing I could control completely. The divorce moved quickly. Derek did not contest it. He hired a lawyer who tried, briefly, to claim he was entitled to half the value of the business. Lydia responded with the corporate documents showing I had purchased my stake with premarital assets and inheritance funds. She also included the forensic analysis of the forged loan. Derek's lawyer advised him to accept the settlement. He did. By December, it was final. Derek received a share of the marital home's equity, half the value of our joint savings, and nothing else. The business, the clients, and the reputation all stayed with me. I heard through the small and gossip-prone world of Little Rock real estate that Derek had moved to Conway and taken a job at a discount brokerage. Vanessa had left the industry entirely. Someone said she was working in marketing for a dentist's office. I didn't verify it. I didn't care. In January, I received a letter. It was from Derek, handwritten on plain paper. It said, "I know you won't believe this, but I am sorry, not because of what I lost, because of what I didn't see. You were always the better agent. You were always the better person. I just didn't want to admit it. I hope you're doing well." Derek, I read it once. Then I filed it in the folder in my car, the one I no longer needed but couldn't quite throw away. By spring, Century Realty had its best quarter in 5 years. I had restructured the commission splits to reward client retention and referral generation, not just close volume. One had hired 2 new agents, both women, both with backgrounds in finance and customer service. I had launched a mentorship program pairing senior agents with new licensees. The culture shifted. People stayed later not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The work felt collaborative instead of competitive. In April, I received a call from a journalist at the Arkansas Business Journal. She was writing a feature on women-owned businesses in Little Rock and wanted to interview me. I agreed. The interview took place in my office. She asked about my background, my approach to leadership, and how I had managed to grow the firm during a turbulent housing market. She did not ask about Derek. I did not bring him up. Near the end of the conversation, she said, "A lot of people describe you as calm under pressure. How do you manage that?" I thought about it. "I think of every problem like a property inspection," I said. "You can't fix what you don't measure. And once you measure it, it's not scary anymore. It's just data." She smiled. That's a good line. The article ran in May. The headline was, "How One Woman Quietly Built Little Rock's Most Resilient Brokerage." It featured a photo of me standing in front of the Century Realty sign, arms crossed, expression neutral. The article was accurate and generous. It brought in 6 new clients in the first week. In June, I hired an operations manager, a former logistics coordinator named Terrell who had no real estate experience but understood systems and people. He took over scheduling, file management, and contractor coordination. It freed me to focus on client relationships and long-term strategy, the parts of the job I was best at. In July, I closed a commercial sale, a mixed-use property downtown that had been on the market for 3 years. The buyer was a developer I had worked with in 2016. He told me he came back because he trusted my word. That moment mattered more than any award. By August, I had been running the firm for 10 months. Revenue was up 18% year over year. Employee turnover was zero. Client satisfaction scores, measured through a third-party survey I'd commissioned, were the highest they'd been since Suzanne's tenure. I didn't celebrate, I just kept working. One evening in late August, I stayed late to review a contract for a first-time buyer, a school teacher purchasing a small bungalow near Hillcrest. The office was quiet. Everyone else had gone home. I was alone with the hum of the air conditioning and the glow of my desk lamp. I thought about Derek, not with anger, not even with regret, just with the clarity that comes from distance. He had wanted to be seen as successful more than he had wanted to do the work that makes success real. I had wanted the opposite, and in the end, the math worked exactly the way it should have. Love does not survive betrayal, but respect, once lost, can never be rebuilt. I had learned that the hard way. I signed off on the contract, locked the office, and drove home. The house was quiet. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table and looked out at the backyard, where the early evening light turned everything soft and gold. I was 37 years old. I owned a business. I had a reputation I had built myself, one transaction at a time. I had no husband. I had no children. I had no drama. I had exactly what I wanted. In September, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a vacation. 3 days in Eureka Springs, a small artist town in the Ozarks. I stayed in a bed and breakfast with no television and no agenda. I walked through galleries. I read a novel. I sat on a porch and watched the light change. On the second day, I met a woman named Iris in a coffee shop. She was a sculptor, older than me by maybe 10 years, with gray streaks in her dark hair and paint permanently embedded under her fingernails. We talked about work. She asked what I did. I told her I ran a real estate firm. She asked if I liked it. I said, I like solving problems. She laughed. That's not the same as liking the work. I thought about it. I like the work because it's honest. A house is worth what someone will pay for it. A contract is enforceable, or it isn't. There's no ambiguity. Sounds lonely, she said. It's clarifying. She nodded. I get that. We talked for an hour. She told me about a sculpture she was working on, a piece about memory and erosion. I told her about a historic property I was trying to list, a 1920s craftsman with original woodwork and a foundation that needed reinforcing. We didn't exchange numbers. We didn't make plans. It was just a conversation, the kind you have with a stranger when you know you'll never see them again. But I thought about what she said. Sounds lonely. Maybe it was. I returned to Little Rock on a Sunday evening. The office reopened Monday morning. I had 14 new emails and 3 voicemails. I answered all of them. I scheduled showings. I reviewed contracts. I went back to the rhythm I knew. In October, exactly 1 year after the awards banquet, I received an invitation to the next one. I was nominated in the same category Derek had won, Broker Leadership Excellence. I almost declined. Then I decided that would be letting the memory of that night hold more weight than it deserved. I attended alone. I wore the same navy dress. I sat at a different table, surrounded by agents from my firm. When my name was announced as the winner, the applause was louder than I expected. I walked to the stage. I accepted the plaque. I looked out at the room and said, simply, thank you. This belongs to the entire Century Realty team. We've built something I'm proud of. I didn't mention Derek. I didn't mention Vanessa. I didn't mention the past year at all. I returned to my seat. One of my agents, a woman named Shanice, leaned over and whispered, that was perfect. I smiled. It was true. The rest of the evening was pleasant and uneventful. I shook hands. I made small talk. I left early. In November, I bought a building, not for the firm, for myself. A small brick warehouse near the river market. One of those properties that had been passed over for years because it needed too much work. I saw it differently. I saw good bones. I saw potential. I hired a contractor and a designer. I told them I wanted the main floor converted into a mixed-use space, part office, part gallery, part event venue. I wanted something that could serve the community, something that wasn't just about transactions. I didn't need it to be profitable. I needed it to be useful. The project took 4 months. It opened in March of the following year. I called it the Common House. It hosted neighborhood meetings, art shows, and small business workshops. I rented it out for cost, not profit. It became the kind of place people talked about, the kind of place that made a neighborhood feel like it had a center. I didn't run it myself. I hired a manager, a woman named Phoebe who had worked in nonprofit arts administration and knew how to stretch a budget. I visited once a week just to check in. It gave me something to care about that had nothing to do with commissions or close rates. In April, I ran into Vanessa at a grocery store. She was in the produce section, holding a bag of apples. She saw me and froze. I nodded. She nodded back. Neither of us spoke. I finished my shopping and left. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was just the acknowledgement that we both still existed, and that was enough. In May, I hired my 50th agent. Century Realty was no longer mid-size. It was one of the top 3 firms in the city. I was 39 years old. I had been in real estate for 13 years. I had built something that would outlast me. In June, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but I was between showings and the area code was local, so I picked up. "Is this Corinne?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes. This is Iris. We met in Eureka Springs. At the coffee shop," I remembered. "Yes. Hello, I'm in Little Rock for a gallery opening," she said. "I wondered if you'd want to get dinner." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, because I didn't know how to want things that weren't transactional. "Sure," I said. We met that evening at a small Italian place near Hillcrest. She wore the same paint-stained jeans. I wore work clothes, a blouse and slacks, because I hadn't gone home to change. We talked about her work, my work, the gallery opening, the state of the housing market. The conversation wasn't romantic. It wasn't networking. It was just easy. At the end of the meal, she said, "You're different than I expected." "How so? You seemed so certain when we met." "Like you had everything figured out." "I don't," I said. "I know," she said. "That's what's different." We stayed in touch. Not every day, not even every week, but enough. By the summer of that year, I had stopped thinking about Derek entirely. His name didn't come up in conversation. His memory didn't surface when I reviewed old files. He had become what most failed partnerships become, a data point, a lesson learned, a chapter that ended. I thought about Vanessa occasionally, but only in passing. I wondered if she was happy. I hoped distantly that she was. Not because I forgave her, because holding on to the alternative required energy I didn't want to spend. In August, I received a letter from Derek's lawyer. It was a formal request to modify the divorce settlement. Derek was asking for a portion of the business's increased value, arguing that his contributions during the marriage had laid the groundwork for its growth. Lydia reviewed the request and laughed. "He has no case," she said. "The growth happened after the dissolution. He has no legal claim." Should I respond? I asked. "I'll respond," she said. "You don't need to." She sent a 2-paragraph letter denying the request and citing the relevant case law. We never heard back. In September, I turned 40. I didn't have a party. I didn't mark the occasion in any public way. I took the day off, drove to Petit Jean State Park, and hiked to Cedar Falls. I sat on a flat rock near the water and ate a sandwich I'd packed. The air smelled like pine and wet stone. The sound of the falls was loud enough to drown out thought. I stayed there for 2 hours. I didn't think about business. I didn't think about Derek or Vanessa or the banquet or the awards or any of it. I just sat and breathed and let the day pass. It was the best birthday I'd ever had. In October, Iris moved to Little Rock. Not for me, she was careful to clarify that. She had been offered a residency at the Arkansas Arts Center and a teaching position at UALR, but she asked if I wanted to get coffee when she arrived. And I said yes. We started seeing each other regularly. Not dates exactly, just time. Dinners, walks, conversations that lasted longer than they needed to. She didn't ask about my past. She didn't try to fix anything. She just showed up. In November, I introduced her to Shanice and Terrell at a firm holiday dinner. Shanice looked at me afterward and said, "She's good for you." "How can you tell?" I asked. "You smiled 4 times tonight," she said. I counted. I laughed. "Is that a lot? For you?" "Yes." By December, Iris and I were spending most evenings together. She worked in her studio. I worked on contracts. We existed in parallel, comfortable, and undemanding. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something honest. And honesty, I had learned, was rarer and more valuable than passion. On Christmas Eve, we sat in my living room with mugs of tea and no agenda. She asked me if I was happy. I thought about it. "I don't know if I know what that means, Fair," she said. "Are you?" I asked. "Most of the time," she said. "I think happiness is just noticing when you're not miserable and deciding that's enough." I smiled. "That's bleak. That's realistic." She was right. In January, I made a decision I had been avoiding for months. I promoted Shanice to partner. She had been with the firm for 8 years, had the highest client retention rate of anyone on the team, and had quietly held things together during the chaos of Derek's firing and the transition. She deserved equity. I offered her 15% of the company at a price she could afford. She cried when I told her. Then she said yes. In February, we formalized the partnership. Lydia drafted the operating agreement. Shanice and I signed it in my office on a Tuesday afternoon. Terrell brought cupcakes. Gwen took a photo. It felt right. With Shanice handling day-to-day operations, I had space to think about what came next. I started consulting with other small brokerages, helping them restructure compensation models and retention strategies. It was work I enjoyed, problem-solving without the emotional weight of my own firm's survival on the line. In March, I was invited to speak on a panel at a state real estate conference in Hot Springs. The topic was leadership through transition. I almost declined. Public speaking wasn't something I sought out. But Shanice convinced me. The panel went well. I talked about the importance of documentation, about building systems that didn't rely on any one person, about the difference between being liked and being respected. Afterward, 3 people approached me with business cards. 2 were brokers looking for consulting help. 1 was a journalist working on a book about women in business. I took all 3 cards. I didn't commit to anything. But I didn't say no either. In April, Iris's first gallery show opened at the Art Center. The sculptures were large, abstract pieces made from reclaimed wood and metal. They looked like they were in the process of either building or collapsing. I couldn't tell which. The show was called What Remains. I stood in front of one piece for a long time. It was a tower of weathered beams, held together by tension and balance, no visible fasteners. It looked precarious. But when I leaned closer, I could see the joinery, the precise angles, the intentional structure underneath. Iris came up beside me. "What do you think?" "It's stronger than it looks," I said. She smiled. "That's the point." The show was reviewed well. 2 pieces sold. Iris was offered a solo exhibition in Memphis for the following year. She was building something too. In May, I got a call from Derek's mother. I hadn't spoken to her since the divorce. She said she wanted to apologize. Not for Derek, she couldn't do that, she said, but for not reaching out sooner. She said she was proud of what I had built. She said she had always known I was capable of more than Derek gave me credit for. I thanked her. I didn't know what else to say. We didn't make plans to meet, but the call mattered. In June, I bought a second property, a duplex near the university. I renovated both units and rented them to graduate students at below-market rates. It wasn't charity. It was an investment in the kind of city I wanted Little Rock to be. By July, I had been running Century Realty for 3 years. Revenue had doubled. The firm had won regional and state recognition. I had been profiled in 3 publications. I had spoken at 2 conferences. I was consulted, respected, and financially secure. I was also tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from overwork. The kind that comes from realizing you've proven everything you needed to prove and the proving no longer feels urgent. I talked to Iris about it one evening. We were sitting on her studio floor, surrounded by half-finished sculptures and the smell of sawdust. "I think I'm done," I said. "With what?" "With needing to be right." She looked at me. "What would you do instead?" "I don't know yet." She nodded. "That's okay." In August, I started stepping back, not leaving, just creating space. Shanice took over more of the client-facing work. Terrell managed operations. I focused on strategy, acquisitions, and the parts of the business that required long-term thinking rather than daily presence. It felt strange at first. I had spent so many years being indispensable that I didn't know how to be optional. But slowly, I adjusted. I started leaving the office at 5 instead of 7. I started taking Sundays off. I started saying no to projects that didn't interest me. In September, I went back to Eureka Springs with Iris. We stayed in the same bed and breakfast. We visited the same coffee shop. The woman who owned it remembered us. She said, "You 2 look happier this time." Iris laughed. "We didn't look happy before? You looked like you were thinking too hard." She wasn't wrong. In October, I received an offer to buy Century Realty. It came from a regional firm based in Fayetteville. They wanted to expand into Little Rock and saw us as an ideal acquisition. The offer was generous. It valued the business at nearly 3 times what I had paid for Suzanne's shares. I sat with the offer for a week. I didn't tell Shanice right away. I didn't tell anyone except Iris. "Do you want to sell?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "I built it, but I don't know if I need to keep holding on to it." "What would you do instead?" "I've been thinking about teaching," I said, "or consulting full-time, or just less." She smiled. "Less sounds good." In November, I told Shanice about the offer. I also told her I wouldn't sell unless she wanted to. She was a partner. The decision was partly hers. She thought about it for 3 days. Then she came into my office and said, "I think you should sell." I was surprised. "Why?" "Because you've already done what you needed to do here," she said. "And because I think the firm will be fine without you. Better than fine. But you won't be fine if you stay just because you think you have to." She was right. We negotiated for 6 weeks. Lydia handled the legal work. The sale closed in January. Shanice stayed on as managing partner under the new ownership. Terrell stayed. Gwen stayed. Most of the agents stayed. The name stayed the same. The work continued. I walked away with enough money to do anything I wanted, or nothing at all. In February, I started teaching a night class at UALR, Real Estate Finance and Ethics. 12 students, mostly people in their 20s and 30s looking to get licensed or move into commercial work. I didn't lecture, I brought case studies. I made them argue both sides. I made them show their math. One student, a woman named Bianca, stayed after class one evening. She said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Did you always know you were going to be successful?" I thought about it. "No. I just knew I wasn't going to let someone else define what I was worth." She nodded. "That's good advice. It's the only advice that matters." In March, Iris and I moved in together. Not into my house, into a loft downtown near the common house. It had exposed brick, tall windows, and enough space for her to work. I sold the house I had shared with Derek. I didn't feel sentimental about it. It was just a structure. I had already taken everything from it that mattered. In April, I started writing. Not a book, just notes. Observations about contracts, about people, about the gap between what we say we value and what we actually protect. I didn't know if it would become anything. I just wrote because the thoughts needed somewhere to go. In May, I got a message from Vanessa. It came through LinkedIn. It said, "I saw the article about the sale of Century Realty. Congratulations. I know this is years too late, but I'm sorry. You deserved better. I hope you're doing well." I read it twice. Then I archived it. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. In June, I turned 42. Iris threw a small dinner at the loft. Shanice came, Terrell came, Lydia came, Phoebe from the common house came, Bianca from my class came. We ate too much, we talked too long. It was easy and warm and exactly the kind of evening I never thought I wanted. At the end of the night, Shanice pulled me aside. "You know what's different about you now?" "What?" "You're not calculating anymore." I smiled. "I'm always calculating." "Okay," she said. "But now you're calculating for yourself, not against someone else." She was right. Money magnifies character. It does not create it. I had learned that the hard way. But I had also learned that once you stop needing to prove anything, the work becomes simpler. Not easier, just clearer. In July, I took a month off. Iris and I drove west, through Oklahoma and New Mexico and into Colorado. We didn't plan the route, we just drove. We stayed in small motels and ate at diners and hiked trails that weren't famous. We talked, we were silent. Both felt fine. One afternoon, we stopped at a rest area outside Taos. We sat at a picnic table and looked out at the mesas, the sky so wide it felt like the only thing that existed. Iris said, "Do you ever think about him, Derek?" "Yeah. Not much," I said. "Sometimes I think about who I was when I was with him. But not about him." "Do you regret it? The marriage?" "Yeah, I thought about it." "No. I learned what I needed to learn." "That's a very practical answer." I smiled. "I'm a very practical person." She laughed. "I know." We stayed there for an hour. Then we got back in the car and kept driving. In August, we returned to Little Rock. I went back to teaching. I went back to consulting. I went back to writing. But everything felt lighter. I had spent so many years building armor that I had forgotten what it felt like to move without it. In September, I gave my first public talk that wasn't about real estate. It was at a women's business conference in Tulsa. The topic was resilience. I talked about documentation. I talked about boundaries. I talked about the difference between being strong and being silent. At the end, a woman in the audience raised her hand. She said, "How did you know when it was time to fight back?" I said, "When staying silent cost more than speaking up." The room was quiet. She nodded. "Thank you." I realized in that moment that the story I had lived wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who had ever been underestimated, everyone who had ever been told they were worth less than they knew they were, everyone who had ever waited for the right moment to prove otherwise. I didn't need Derek to apologize. I didn't need Vanessa to understand. I didn't need the people who had doubted me to admit they were wrong. I just needed to know that I had built something real. And I had. In October, I sat on the rooftop of the loft with Iris, watching the sun set over the Arkansas River. The air was cool. The city lights were starting to flicker on. Everything felt exactly the size it was supposed to be. Iris said, "What are you thinking about?" "Nothing," I said. "Liar." I smiled. "I'm thinking that I'm glad I didn't scream." "When?" "At the banquet, when Derek thanked her." "I'm glad I didn't scream or cry or make a scene. I'm glad I just waited." "Why?" "Because screaming would have made me feel better for 5 minutes. Waiting made me free." She reached over and took my hand. "You're allowed to feel good about that." "I do." We sat there until the sky went dark. The city below us hummed with traffic and voices and life. I didn't own it. I didn't control it. I didn't need to. I had spent so many years calculating value, measuring risk, protecting myself from loss. And I had been good at it. But the best thing I ever did wasn't building a company or winning an award or outlasting the people who underestimated me. The best thing I ever did was learning when to stop keeping score. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever had to rebuild from nothing, if you've ever wondered whether quiet strength is enough, I hope this story reminded you that it is. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to know your worth and refuse to settle for less.